Hey guys, what's going on? It's nice to be getting back to the Jaws series of reviews here on the channel that I'm doing with my buddy D Movieman. I want to say a big thanks to him right at the top of this video for joining me here in this video to talk about Jaws 2, the follow-up to the original Jaws. And yeah, we're going to be getting into that in just one second. But before we do that, I want to take a moment and shout out two very important individuals who did me a huge favor in creating a new Halloween-themed intro that you're about to hear in a second and will be on any horror movie review for the Halloween season moving forward. Maybe I'll just start throwing it on horror reviews. Who knows? But a big thanks to the guy who created the visuals for that, and that is my buddy Jeannot over at Q Reviews, and then my buddy Jiano Joel, who did me the favor of doing all the music that you hear here on the channel in my original intro from back in the day, the current intro that I use on all my other videos, and the music on my outro as well. A big thanks to Q Reviews and Jiano Joel for creating this intro for me and just being awesome friends. I really appreciate the two of them, and just, you know, being creative for the sake of helping my channel out is something I'm so grateful for. And I'm going to leave the links down below, as I usually do, to those individuals, so you can go give them some love, check out their work, right? Whether it be their YouTube channels, whether it be Jiano Joel's music, whether it be their websites, whatever the case may be. I'm going to leave the link to that down below so you guys can go give them some love. And without further ado, let's get into Jaws 2. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Jaws 2. Steven Spielberg has left the director's chair, and this time around you have Jiano Joel, who is in the director's chair, and we have a returning cast of people like Scheider, Lorraine, Murray Hamilton, and some new faces in here as well, like Mark Gruner and Dusenberry and Gary Springer. And I think the part that is the best about this movie is the return of John Williams as the composer. Hey guys, what's going on? As I said at the very beginning of this video, we're talking about Jaws 2, and this is a series that I began with my buddy D Movieman, and you guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you, and I hope you guys enjoyed that new intro that I'm hoping to tag on to more horror and Halloween related videos in the future. But now we're going to be talking about Jaws 2, and yeah, this is one of those situations where you have such an iconic film that started the franchise and loses the ultimate reason that that film was so popular, and that is the original writer and director, Steven Spielberg. Now, I think one of the greatest things about this film is the fact that we still do retain John Williams in the composing musical chair, which does really elevate a lot of the scenes of this film. I don't think that Jaws 2 is a bad film, as some may say, but I don't think it's necessarily a great film. What made that original Jaws film so great is that though it is about a shark killing people, it's not really about the shark. It's about the people in the situation, and what really makes the film memorable are lines of dialogue, the performances, and the way that these characters are fleshed out over the course of the movie. I think that some people going into Jaws today that have never seen the film will expect a lot of shark time and will be surprised to see that there is far more time spent with the humans and is far more about the dialogue leading up to that third act, giving us all those iconic shark sequences that we have been waiting to see the whole movie. There's a real buildup, a real anticipation buildup as you're watching that first movie that leads up to that third act. And then in the case of Jaws 2, well, there's so much about this that just feels undercooked. I don't think this is a bad movie like I mentioned earlier, but I do think this is a movie that does have its issues. Before I get into my negatives, which I'm going to get into after my buddy D Movieman shares his thoughts, I do want to talk about what I really enjoy about this film. I do think that the animatronic coming back was a really great thing. I think that it's awesome to still have a really solid animatronic here in this movie that does look pretty good. There are moments in comparison to the first one where the shark does look a little bit more rubbery in this one. There are a couple of moments where the shark may run into a boat and it looks like their mouth kind of bends a little bit unnaturally, and you can definitely tell it's an animatronic. Whereas in the first film, Steven Spielberg was having a lot of attention to detail to make sure that the shark looked real, or as real as it could be in most sequences. Even though that film, has dated elements, a lot about the shark is still uncomfortable and unnerving, especially when it's underwater. Similar to the first film, there is a utilization of both animatronic shark as well as actual footage of real life sharks to kind of play out these sequences. I think it works better in the first film, but it does, work its kind of magic here a little bit to some degree as well. Though I do think that it is great in general to just have the animatronic back. Beyond that, Roy Scheider is a fantastic part to have returning to this franchise because, he's kind of part of what made that first film amazing. But this time around, we don't really have too many other returning characters except for his wife and the mayor. And ultimately, they don't really serve much of a purpose in this story. Once again, there is a shark. It has appeared. It's killing people, and Roy Scheider is starting to sniff it out really, really early on. And so, of course, he's going to seem like somebody who's really paranoid based on the events of the first film, but, nobody's really believing him. And I got to say right out of the gate, that's just kind of ridiculous. It's one of those situations you see in so many of these movies where from one movie to the next, characters kind of forget what came before. And so in the case of Jaws, you just had this town that was being killed, a very, very small island, a small town island that just got decimated by this shark before, had a lot of people get killed. And now this new shark is back and it's causing issues and nobody wants to believe Roy Scheider again. So now we have a whole nother film where he's got to kind of convince people and eventually save the day at the end of the film. In a lot of ways, minus the really great character development, the great character story, and including a lot more teenagers and young kids, this movie is essentially a lesser version of the first film in a lot of ways. That's not to say that this film doesn't have its own identity at times, but it really is a bare bones iteration of what the first film was, with a few more annoying elements to the overall picture. Beyond that, though, I do find myself enjoying it while watching it. I think it has a charm. That John Williams score does really help the experience. And by the time the movie was coming to an end, I did find myself just having enjoyed the watch, but more of just like, oh yeah, that was a good time, just something to pass the time, watching a classic film. It's kind of interesting how certain franchises like this are a little bit more tolerable when you go back and watch some of those older installments, unless something's really bad. Even if it's not fantastic, sometimes you can be like, oh, this was a film of its time, and sequels in this era were so specifically bad sometimes that it kind of allows us to be a little bit more forgiving of films like this when we go back and watch them, versus maybe a sequel to a big franchise film like in the modern day that'll get a lot more hate because there's far more expectation. So yeah, overall, I find that this is an entertaining film to watch, but there's plenty of issues that I do have when it comes to the characters, character choices, the time spent with certain characters, and just the overall importance on really building a character and story development. This film feels a lot more like it's about getting to the shark kills and retreading some water of our main character trying to convince people that there is a shark and them not believing him, even though he just saved the day from another shark not long ago. Now, I do have more to say, and there's some negatives I want to get into more than I've already talked about. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to my buddy D Movieman so he can tell us what he thought about the movie, and then we'll get back to my thoughts.
Hey everyone, this is D Movieman, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, I'm coming to you all with another review collaboration with my cinematic compadre, Anthony A. Perez. So, we are continuing our foray into the Jaws franchise with Jaws 2. Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water. Directed by Jiano Joel and starring Roy Scheider, Lorraine and Murray Hamilton. So, I'm going to start with the pros. I must say, there are a lot more positives than I expected, especially for a sequel. So, the biggest challenge with any sequel is recapturing everything that made the first film great, while also continuing that same story without completely repeating everything that happened in the first film, or just cranking everything up to level 20 to distinguish itself from the first. Some sequels are right on target, and some are not. I do think this film does a solid enough job of retaining everything that made the original film great, without completely deviating from that or feeling like a completely different film. As I previously mentioned, our director here is Jiano Joel. Prior to this film, he directed the 1975 horror film Bug. Then after Jaws 2, went on to direct Somewhere in Time in 1980, Supergirl in 1984, and Santa Claus the Movie in 1985. I do think his direction is solid enough. You can tell it is not the same director, but it doesn't completely disrupt the film, and I think it works well enough as any sequel possibly could in these circumstances. Now, what helps is that once again we are seeing the town of Amity Island. Now, I didn't get a chance to mention it in my Jaws review, but the town of Amity Island is shot in Martha's Vineyard, which is an island located south of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. It really is a great setting for the film. I think the atmosphere and the simplicity of the town really enhances the story, especially as a contrast to all the mayhem that goes down later. I also really loved all the scenes with the various water sports and the boating in general. It felt like there was a greater focus on that here as opposed to just the beach in the first film, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked how it was shot, and overall, I just thought it was a really fun addition to this. The performances overall are fine, but of course, naturally, the standout once again is Roy Scheider as Police Chief Martin Brody. And despite some changes, he still is the central character and the central performance that really adds some emotional weight to the story and really brings the film together. Lastly, although we know as far as the structure how some of this is going to go down with the shark in question, I still thought some of the kills were pretty effective and pretty shocking. So, I'm going to jump over to the cons. Now, this is still a sequel, and as a result, I have some issues with it. The first and most obvious con is no Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg said himself that filming the first Jaws was a complete nightmare. So the chances of him coming back were slim to none. Like I said before, Jiano Joel is fine, and his direction here is not a complete step down from the first. But this is Steven Spielberg we're talking about here. And I think under Steven Spielberg's direction, there was just a lot more energy, there was a lot more structure, and I think there was just a lot more suspense and intensity in the film overall. But here, it just all feels a lot more aimless, and it feels like we're really just going through the motions. Roy Scheider is doing his best in reprising his role as Brody, but unfortunately, there's no one here for him to bounce off of. There's no one matching his performance or just matching his energy overall. We don't have those very distinct, very memorable personalities of Quint and Hooper this time around. Now, if you've seen the first film, then you know why Quint isn't here. Sadly, Richard Dreyfuss was not interested in returning to this film without Spielberg directing, so there's also no Hooper. There's no other dominant personality here, and there's also not another significant adult role. So a lot of this feels like Roy Scheider is just kind of out there floundering in the water by himself. No pun intended. It also does not help that Roy Scheider basically got forced into this role to fulfill contractual obligations by Universal Pictures. And on the set, he constantly butted heads with Jiano Joel. I mean, at one point, it even got physical. Now, I wasn't aware of that when I watched this, but I did feel this weird disconnect from Roy Scheider and his performance as I was watching. It's not a bad performance, but I just kind of felt like something was missing. Well, now I know why. Now, we do have Lorraine Gary and Murray Hamilton returning from the first film, but not even they have a whole lot to do here. So, these teenagers. I totally get from a production standpoint shifting the dynamics here and in the process appealing to a younger demographic. But for me, it didn't really enhance the film. Now, I am not anti-teenager by any means, but I found that, for me at least, it's very difficult to make teenage dynamics or teenage characters work without it becoming very obnoxious and very annoying. I mean, teenagers are, by nature, very annoying.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
And I was a teenager once, so I understand. But because these teenage characters take up so much screen time and so much of the story is centered around them, it's just kind of like, ugh. So having to watch these scenes where there are these shark attacks and we have these teenagers, and it's just like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die! I just got tired. I got really, really tired. The suspense here is kind of non-existent. And I understand that given the dynamics of the first film and how we saw that play out, trying to redo that all over again would have been kind of pointless. But I think constantly showing the shark and not hiding it the same way doesn't help either. Neither did the scene where a character accidentally pours gasoline on themselves, accidentally shoots a flare gun into their boat, and accidentally causes an explosion. So with the lack of suspense, it then means that a lot of these scenes in between the kills and some of these other moments just feel very drawn out, and they meander on and on and on, and it's just like, okay, can we bring this to a close, please?
I'm bored! I'm so bored!
Lastly, given the events of the first film, it makes absolutely no sense that the events of this film are happening. There's a scene here where the mayor is once again the focus. We know how that character is. But it was kind of odd because up until that point, it almost felt like this hadn't happened before. So then when we do get to that scene and Brody does reference the first film, it's like, huh? It's just totally nonsensical, and it's pretty implausible. It just really shows that we needed a reason to make this story work and to justify there being a sequel, even though it doesn't make any logical sense. And maybe some of that is meant to represent how people in power don't learn from their mistakes, or they will still rush into disaster even though there have been previous disasters and they don't learn, but it just was really hard for me to get around that. I was just like, we're really doing this again. And this is the justification. Okay, so I'm going to give Jaws 2 a C+. Now, this wasn't bad at all, and definitely a huge step up compared to a lot of sequels we normally see. Unfortunately, even though it's not a huge, crazy step down from the first, it's still a step down from the first. And ultimately, the story and the progression of it and the beats and all of that just feel really unnecessary. And ultimately, it's just a really unnecessary addition to a story and film that already made such an important and significant impact in film history. I still love the water sports, though. So thank you once again, Anthony. I always appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. And I can only begin to imagine what our thoughts are going to be for Jaws 3. Whew. So, once again, this is D, Movieman, signing off. And I'll see you at the movies.
A big thanks to my buddy D Movieman for joining me here in another video. We recently checked out things like Don't Worry Darling together in person. If you guys haven't checked out that video already, I'm definitely recommend checking that out. It's here on the channel, one of my more recent videos. And again, if you guys have not already checked it out, go back and check out our review for the first Jaws, where we break down our thoughts on that movie. But yeah, a big thanks to D Movieman being here. And yeah, there's a lot that we agree on, a couple of things that we disagree on here or there, but honestly, I would say for the most part, you and I are pretty locked in on a lot of elements. And yeah, I too, similar to D Movieman, thought it was cool to see some of the water sports in here, and I like that we spend a lot more time on the water in this movie. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into some of my negatives here. As yeah, I would say that similar to what D Movieman said, it does feel like a lot of this movie just feels like we're just kind of present. There are parts of this movie that just feels like we're just existing and we're not really going anywhere. There are parts of this film that feel aimless, and it just feels like we're spending a lot of time doing the same things. And kind of like I was saying at the very beginning of this review, there is a lot about the film that feels like a redundancy in comparison to the first one. We have a main character who is seeing that there's a shark out there, there is danger, people are dying unexpectedly and randomly, and nobody wants to believe him, especially those that were involved with the first film. And then it's too late by the time anybody wants to believe him, and the shark is already starting to kill people. So you do have a very, very similar vibe from that first film into the second film that just isn't done as well and as excitingly, and with characters that are as exciting to watch as that original film. Another thing that I noticed that I wasn't a huge fan of watching this film was just the loss in flair visually that the franchise had with the very first installment. Not only does, John Williams work beautifully with any movie that he's able to be a part of, which he really does enhance a lot of the scenes of this movie, but also when John Williams is able to work with a director like Steven Spielberg, the magic that they can create is so magical. And so when you watch that first film, you have John Williams giving the phenomenal score, but he has great visuals to work off of, whether it be the creepy visuals of the shark or things just like the characters on a boat, the way that the camera moves, the way that the film feels, the zoom ins, the zoom out. There are so many elements about that original Jaws film that on a technical level are so well done, and it just goes to show that you had somebody at the helm that has a vision for something cinematic. It's not all about just throwing a camera on the characters and on the shark and kind of seeing what happens. A lot of times it is taking those multiple takes to find the right take, doing different camera angles and different things that make your film stand out. And when you watch that first Jaws movie and you see a movie like this that in a lot of ways is very similar, it stands out so clearly which director is the one with the more creative vision. And so overall, that's how I feel about this film. Is it just lacks that flair and that excitement. On top of all the story elements that it lacks, it just lacks all of the things that made that original Jaws amazing, while also being so similar to what that similar Jaws was on a very bare bones level. So overall, Jaws 2, a movie that I don't hate, but I don't love, clearly. There's plenty about it that just feels like a huge step down from the first film. Not a terrible film, and by no means the worst in this franchise. I would say that this movie is just a middle-of-the-road film, which just feels like a bigger disappointment when the first film in this franchise is far beyond the average film, and it actually is one of the most iconic films of all time. That's always going to be the weird downfall of anything that's part of a franchise, because I think if this was called anything else, it would just be another, shark movie with some enjoyable elements and some not so enjoyable elements. It would have been a middle-of-the-road shark movie. But the fact that it follows one of the greatest films ever made, created by one of the greatest creators of cinema of all time, just makes some of the big glaring issues of this film shine a little bit more than maybe it would have had it been just another random shark movie. So a big thanks once again to my buddy D Movieman for joining me here for another video. We're going to be talking about Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D next. Yeah, if you guys thought that I didn't like Jaws 2 all that much, even though, like I said, I don't hate it, I don't love it, I like it enough, it's right in the middle. If you guys thought that I was kind of about this one, Jaws 3D, Jaws 3. We got a lot in store for that video, and I can't wait to not only hear what I have to say about it after I give it the rewatch, but also hearing what you guys have to say about it and what my buddy D Movieman has to say about it, because I have a feeling that D Movieman is going to have me laughing quite a bit in his review. But if you guys enjoyed this video, I want to welcome you to hit that subscribe button. If you have not already done so, please hit that like button because it really, really helps the channel out. And comment your thoughts. Which is your favorite film in this franchise? Which do you feel is the worst sequel in this franchise? And something I wanted to ask in the first Jaws video that I didn't ask, and I want to ask you now is, do you think we'll ever get a 5th installment in the franchise? And with so many shark films in this world at this point that were spawned off of Jaws, do you think we really even need one without it feeling like another ripoff? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think Jaws should have ended with the first, or do you enjoy all 4 Jaws movies? Definitely leave your thoughts down below. I know I asked you a lot of questions there, but answer whatever you want. Anyway, a big thanks to you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.